Okay, I think we're recording. This is the Cult of Conversation. This is Chad Schmidt here with my family, my mom and dad and sister. My goal today is to try to explain or have a conversation about what atheism is in a family that has a long history of theism, of belief in God in it. And to kind of talk through that. So you know me, I'm Chad. Why don't the rest of you guys introduce yourselves?
You guys go first.
All right. I'm Gary, Chad's dad. He's my fault. Well, something to do with it.
Yeah.
And this is fun. Great.
I'm Lynn Schmidt, and I'm Chad's mom.
I am Janine Dirksen, and I am Chad's sister most of the time.
Adorable sister.
Adorable.
Adorable little sister.
Little. With more wrinkles, but
Yeah, right.
we won't talk about that's a different podcast.
No, let's not go there.
Yeah, so as you can tell, my dad is an Anglican priest.
Yeah, you wanted me to wear this, right?
Yes, I asked him to wear this just so we could have that on center stage. Yeah, very holy guy.
Holy. Yeah.
And mom's side of the family has a long history of being Mennonites. And so my tag name often I go by the Mennonite atheist or what have you, but we have a long history of being connected to the church. And your own history is an interesting one too, Dad, because you've changed so much from having a background of being a Mennonite all the way to being an Anglican now. So we're going to address that at another point on the channel and interview you on that. But for now, why don't I just get into it? What do you guys have any perceptions before I get started on what you think, like what you thought in the past before you knew that I lost my faith in theism? What were your ideas? Like, what ideas did you have? What it meant to be an atheist? Because it freaked me out when I was a believer. The term was really uncomfortable.
Oh yeah, totally. I think for sure that I didn't really know anything about it, but to be honest, I didn't know a lot about my own faith even growing up. I think it was like a good feeling to be in a Christian community and to have lots of friends, and you had a common belief, and you wanted to believe that there was a higher power who was going to look after you, because your life is scary. And as a kid, you just looked for that to kind of carry you through those hard times. So I think anything outside of that, I would have said I was really open to, because I wanted to be this open kid even at a younger age. But I think a lot of that freaked me out, and I kind of bought into a lot of the that culture of like anything outside of of Christianity is probably not the best for you kind of idea.
Yeah, cool. Bit. So you didn't really have like a specific picture of what an atheist would be. It just sounded
like someone who I guess it's pretty naive, but like didn't care about anything but themselves.
Right, like a person who is morally left it because they just wanted a party or whatever.
I don't know, just kind of like didn't want to think about anything outside of them. Christianity was about giving back, and that was how it was kind of sold, and it was kind of like about God and Jesus loving on people, and you going forth and doing that on behalf of the higher power that you believe in. And then atheists seemed kind of like, in my head, they seemed kind of like angry, really jaded against the church, like oppositional almost.
Right, like maybe they left because they were angry at God, or they've been hurt, or they're just jaded by religion or something.
Yeah, but I didn't even delve into knowing if that was true or not. But I just, because I was young, but I think I thought those kind of things. I don't know where I got that from, but because I wasn't talked to about that.
Yeah, I think I had the same thing actually. What about you guys, Mom and Dad?
Well, I think when we spent all that time in California, and Dad was going to seminary, and I had time to think and time to read and time to go to some of the classes. And and even before that, things that I read made made me very open to different how people thought and what they felt and about spiritual things. And I think when you shared that when we were in Virginia, it it didn't it didn't shock me really. Um, it shocked me only because of what people would say,
Yeah,
what
right.
my friends would say. That made me
Or your family, Mom.
nervous. But I knew you. I've known you all my life, and I know where your heart is, and I know that you've been on a seeking and all that for so long, all the time that I've known you, and passionate about different things. So it didn't really shock me. It felt really good that you could share it the way you did, and
That's
I
nice.
don't have a problem
Yeah.
Yeah.
thinking about that.
No, I know you guys have been so understanding of that. There's not some jadedness, like you said, Janine, or something. This is just really, it was hard for me to lose my faith. It wasn't something I wanted to have happen, right? Like it wasn't what I was seeking. But what about you, Dad?
Yeah, for me, if I go back to my entrenched in the Anabaptist Mennonite world, it was sort of like I was brought up in a culture where everyone was white, and there were only two races. There were Germans, Mennonites, and there were English. And if you weren't Mennonite, you were English. And English at that time was a derogatory term, which is ironic that I'm Anglican at this point in time.
Right.
But nonetheless,
Just
no,
a small
because
one,
it wasn't a
5 feet.
This is a small one.
So yeah, exactly.
5 feet tall.
So when we talked about atheists, that was a very derogatory term at the time, in terms of that they believed in nothing.
Right. Nihilists or
It
something.
was a very dualistic world, and we were right, which meant everyone else was wrong, and everyone else was English, including the atheists. As I started going to school and education, and I had a mother, as you guys know, your grandmother, who, at least for me within that very rigid world, was a very grace-giving kind of a person, and very curious, and very accepting in so many ways. So I can't say that there wasn't any sort of emotional angst in me when you first announced that you were losing your faith, or that if you had to identify yourself as an atheist or as something, that was the direction you were going. What it did, and the gift that it was for me personally, was a reciprocity of gift. And so I have loved my discussions with you that were initially sort of hard emotionally, and my discussions with Janine and some of the people that she gets together with, in terms of this curiosity and seeking to understand.
Yeah.
So now, if I have to say how I feel about it, I think it goes along a little bit with what Mom said. It's like, we know both your hearts. We watch you as parents. We watch you as spouses. We watch you as how you relate to people. And no matter how you define it or we define it in different ways, that is, for us, much more transcendent than who's right or who's wrong in terms of the definitions.
Yeah, I understand that. That's very generous. You guys have been very thoughtful about it. I do know I have people I've talk to who don't have a similar situation where it is much more scary to be able to share with family when faith is lost, or they just hide it completely. And in fact, I did go through a phase where I did hide this. I didn't even know to name it atheism. I used the word agnostic because it felt safer. It felt like people would think that was less threatening, even though it had nothing to do with theism or atheism directly. And I'll show you what I mean by that.
The gift for us, for me, in hindsight, was that as you went through that process, I witnessed how the depth of torment that it put you through, both in terms of the ideology and where you were moving, but also in terms of how other people would respond.
Yeah.
Not just us, but your friends.
Yeah, I get it, Dad. Go ahead. Sorry, I think I cut you off.
No.
So the what you just said, the ideology, what was really hard for me was my faith was really important to me. And when I started to doubt things, I would just pray my way out of it and, regain intimacy with God. It was just super easy at first, but the doubts kept haunting and they kept begging me to listen, I think. And what I really wanted was honesty. Like, how can I describe who I am and say something that doesn't feel like there's a little bit of a sneakiness or not something accurate about what I really believe? And I remember the first time I heard, or I said out loud, I don't know. It was such a relief, right? Like I said something that wasn't tainted by doubts it was clean. It felt like, well, that's literally true. I have no idea.
Totally.
Right? And it was such a relief to find that. So that was a bit of a gateway for me. But really for me, defining, where I am became a question of truth. So all of this has to do for me, with truth. What is true? What can I accept as true? It isn't so much an emotional thing. I think that it was that, but where my doubts came from weren't there. It was just, is it true? Is there a good reason to believe that all these things that I had been committed to and have evangelized people towards, or put a lot of effort in? I wanted to be a missionary, right? And I wanted to be working in the church.
You'd be a really good one.
Yeah, well, converting people, I was actually pretty good at that.
You have, I feel like you naturally have that. I mean, you went into teaching and now you're kind of in sales. So I just feel like you have that natural ability to kind of guide. And I'm not talking manipulative guiding. I don't mean that all the time. I just mean like you have a natural ability to guide people and get people excited about what you're excited about, or even get excited about what they're excited about, and want to look into that and kind of help with that process, whether it's yours or not.
Well, that's why you guys are here.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's cool. Like, you have a gift in that. And I think that's I think a lot of people who are in evangelical, I'm going to call it evangelical sales, whether it's atheist sales in their like their belief system, no matter what it is, whether you're a Mormon, whether you're a Christian, whether you're, whatever your belief system is, I think you have that personality that gets people excited to at least delve into wondering about things and questioning things. And I think everyone, in my opinion, I think that that's good for people. Like, I'm not scared of that. And I think that you've had a part in me being that way.
Oh, that's a nice thing to say. Thank you for those, for the kind words. I really do appreciate that.
Yeah, like, I think that when I first heard, like, going back to that, I don't know if that's okay if I go back to,
whatever you want.
But when I kind of found out, I didn't have a conversation with you. I kind of found it out in the air, right? Yeah. So I actually was, but I was a lot like younger when I found out. I think in my brain, not in my number, and I think I was kind of taken aback by it, just because maybe I didn't have that conversation with you. So then I was kind of a little, like, I didn't know what to do with that. And I was immersed more in the Christian kind of scene then. So I think there was a part of me that was like, oh, like, are we not alike anymore? Like, it was more based on, are we not going to be as close as in my head I want to be? It wasn't necessarily that I was worried about you going to hell or any
Right.
of that garbage.
Right.
But I just was more concerned about, I guess, without even knowing it at the time, kind of more probably just not knowing enough about anything that way, like atheism, what you really thought, where, what that meant. The unknown kind of was freaky to me. But
Well, and I
then,
mean, sorry, Janine, I
no,
can't,
it's okay. But then
please.
I'm not at all. That doesn't even, like, none of it really phases me anymore.
Well, now that we've got all that off the table, this like worried about the judgment. I haven't felt judgment, although I have felt afraid to say exactly what I am, or even to discover it. In many ways, I went through a period where I didn't think about this stuff terribly much when I was in the U.S. teaching and stuff. But since I've come home, it was to Canada and moved back to Canada. It got a little harder to not feel like I needed to know exactly where what are the labels that make sense to me, because I want to be honest with my friends if we're going to connect, and with family. I'm not going to pretend, or it's just not my style. It's not like I think everybody should do that, but for me, I want to know who I am and be able to talk about it. And if we're going to be friends, I want it that to be this to be part of it. I do think this is actually a very small part of what I believe. It just happens to be a very um, emotionally intense issue for so many people, almost everybody I love, right? And so it is important, and I do think it is important to be able to say what somebody who doesn't believe in all the traditional things, how that works. So you'll have to forgive when I bring up these slides for the sort of formalism of it. It's a philosophical question for me. It isn't just a personal one. So here, let me show you what I created some definitions just so I could kind of lay them out. And let's see if this works.
And I want to say one thing along
Yeah,
that,
go ahead, Dad.
and that for Mom and I, regardless of what you or Janine or the grandkids or other family members go through in their journey of life,
And Lynn Schmidt.
Yeah, we did not want to have you feel like you had to tiptoe about what was really going on inside of you to maintain a connection or to please us.
Yeah, no, I have never felt like the connection was there. In fact, you were very helpful when I was going through a lot of stuff, Dad, and finding alternatives to a harder evangelical Christianity that eased the discomfort and made me feel more comfortable in faith while I was going through my search. So you've been a very important part of that. So atheism isn't a thing that exists unless there's theism. There would be no atheists if there weren't people who believed in a God. A theism just means a God belief, essentially. This is not something you all don't know, but just so we kind of get on the same page. And feel free to, if you see anything on here, just interject. Like seriously, just talk right. Interrupt me and stop me. So theism is essentially a Greek word meaning a God believer. A theist is a person who believes in a God, some God, one or more. The word atheism is just the prefix a in Greek means non or not. It just negates the thing that comes after it. So if you're Gnostic, you know something. That means knowledge. You know something is true. If you're agnostic, that means you're not knowing. You don't know. So just means not. It doesn't mean anti. Like when you write a thesis in a paper, if you believe the opposite thing, that means you're talking about the antithesis, the antithesis. So A does not mean the opposite. It just means if you have a thesis and you don't believe in that thesis, you believe a thesis, not in that thesis. You're not believing the opposite necessarily. I'll explain that a little more later, but it basically just means a non-belief in a God. If you lack a belief in a God, you're in not X. So if you see this diagram over here, it's a Venn diagram of everything. Everything you can think of fits into this. I'll show you in a second. It's called the Law of Excluded Middle in philosophy. Whatever you put in X, the only other option is not X. So everything that fits into X, if you're a believer, you're in here. Everybody else is in here. There are no other options. There's no third middle ground.
And you believe in that?
Well, no, this is just philosophy. It's not a
Okay.
belief. This is a fact.
Oh, okay.
This isn't me sort of saying this is what I believe. This
Okay.
is a diagram of literally how everything works philosophically.
Okay.
You can't logically be something outside of these two possibilities. We'd love to think it's more complicated than that, but it just isn't. In fact, it's not possible. So those people who have never heard of God before, where would they fit in? They would be not X, not there'd be not they're non-theists, they're atheists. Why? Because they don't believe X. They don't believe in theism. They've never heard of it before, and they lack a belief in a God. So an atheist is just somebody who lacks a belief in a God, and they fit into the group of people who are not X. Theists are X. So everybody in this circle are people who believe in God. Everybody else in the world fits into this, no matter what their beliefs are. As long as they don't believe in a God, they're not X, they're atheists. Make sense? Not really.
Yes.
No, it makes sense.
It's a
Kind
little.
of.
It
It
feels,
does.
this
I don't
point
know if
feels
I
a little-
I don't know if I can fight that huge thought process, but there's parts of me that don't agree with it.
Yeah, no, I know. I don't want this to be the case. It's just I have to accept it logically. It's
I
not
just
something I want to be
philosophically,
true.
yeah.
I
What's
just
that?
don't sorry, go dad.
Philosophically, where my question comes is, but it also at the same time feels a little dualistic. But I'll see what happens as we
Well,
go.
dualistic isn't a problem if there's no other option. Like, so we would like it to be, there to be some kind of middle option. But in terms of truth, either the God exists or a God does not exist. That's it. You can't say that there's kind of exists, because if he kind of exists, he exists. There's only those two options. Either God exists or God does not exist. That's it. There's no third.
What
It's
about
called
the I'm not sure if God exists?
that's a different issue. If you're not sure, then you're not certain. You would say,
Would that be on the X? Could the X move a little closer to where the circle line is?
I mean, it could move closer, but it would still be on the outside of that line, right? If you're not sure, it depends what you mean by that, because there are
Mhm.
people who would say they believe in a God who would never say, I'm sure there's a God,
Right.
right? And so they would, if you're saying, if the question is, I believe that a God exists, then it's belief that is in X, not certainty. That's a different question. That's a different X.
Okay.
Are those who are certain that God exists, if that's what the question is, those would be an X, and everybody who's not certain would be not X.
All right.
Making sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it what this does is it helps me isolate the question very precisely, so that when somebody says, do you believe? I answer the question, do you believe? I don't say, I don't know, because then I'm not answering the question. I'm talking about knowledge, not about belief. I've just shifted the grounds on which we're talking. So if you know that there's a God, if I ask the question, do you know that there's a God? And you say yes, then you're in X in terms of knowledge, and I'm not X. And there are lots of Christians who are not agnostic about God. They would never say, I know that a God exists, but they would say, I do believe that a God exists. I think there's good enough reason to believe in a God. Does that help a little bit?
Yeah.
Yeah. So anybody so that's the minimum. This one is one type of definition. There's a long history of what atheism means. It could mean lots of different things, but just generally speaking, non-theism means not believing in a God. And that's anybody who's not convinced that a God exists. The most common definition that people think of is a belief that there is no God. I think most people think that, well, you believe there is no God. Well, no, that's not necessarily the case. There are atheists who believe there is no God, but every person who believes there is no God lacks a belief in a God, and that's a different thing. Not believing X is different than believing that X is not true. And I'll show you how that works in a second. So any questions on this section here?
Well, that
No,
supports some of the reading I've had. That is grateful for certain parts of faith tradition in terms of their benefits to culture, even
Right.
though they may define themselves as atheists and have a sense of gratitude for the Christian heritage in terms of its development of what education.
Meditation, contemplation. Yeah. So what you call spiritual practice is there's no need necessarily for belief in God for most of those things. So there are, lots of atheists who practice those, kind of prayerful and mindfulness and that kind of thing, or contemplative. And that would agree that there's lots of great things that have come out of the Christian tradition and other traditions in terms of religion, for sure. This is just, again, it's only one belief. So let me go to the next slide. This might help. Whoops. So if you look at this one, an atheist is just somebody who believes a few less things. Like I go up to 80% and we share in common all those beliefs.
Yeah.
But then there's this whole set of other beliefs that I just don't accept. That's it. There's no real, it's just like, here, let me try this. I'm going to go right to the end of the, what beliefs do atheists have? Let me correct that. That's hilarious. What can the label atheist tell you about someone? To me, all it does is tell me something about what I believe about one question. Does a God exist? What do you believe about a God? Like I'm also a non-baker. If you ask me, what do you do for a living? And I said, I'm a non-baker. That wouldn't help you very much, tell you what I believe or what I do for a living. I'm also a non-magician. Is that helpful? Like,
I don't think that's true.
Yeah. Maybe I'm more of a magician than I think. You don't believe me on that. But I'm a non-alchemist. I'm a non-astrologer. I'm a
You're an alchemist.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe there's some pushback that I deserve on some of these claims.
You kind of set yourself up.
But my point remains that you can't tell anything other than one question. It gets answered when somebody says they're an atheist. All that means is they do not have a belief. They are not convinced that a God exists. That's it. That's it. And it can't tell you what I believe because I'm a secular humanist. There are atheists that still could believe in the supernatural. They just don't believe a God exists. Like they could believe that ghosts exist or spirits exist or something like that, right? There's no conflict with being an atheist and believing in a supernatural realm. That's a separate question. So it's just whether a God exists or not is the purest thing. So to me, like when I hear people talking about Christianity, I just think, well, you and I, if you're a Christian, we agree up to here on so many things, usually science, all of these different claims. But then there's these other things that are added on. That's where I believe less things. That's how I picture it.
That's nice.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is where I thought I'd bring up the agnostic thing, just because so many people, when I talk about this, they go, oh, well, you don't believe that a God exists. You're not saying there is no God. You just don't believe that a God exists. Oh, you're just an agnostic. As if it's less threatening.
Yeah.
It's
less used.
Well, and people are less scared of the word agnostic. I think of atheists and I think of, people who eat babies for breakfast, right? So it's
with granola.
With granola on the side. Yeah, yogurt to make it tastier.
Weird.
So
weird.
So agnostic just means not knowing. The term was originally coined by an atheist who didn't want to have to carry the burden of defending the idea that there is no God. Like, how would I prove that? Ask me to demonstrate that there are no unicorns. Like, how could I show that? Like, where would I find no unicorns? Everywhere? Like, how would I show that? It's like trying to, right. But it's the same kind of thing. If you don't believe that a God exists, that it's not necessary for you to reject the claim that a God exists to support the idea that there is no God. All you're doing is saying that the people who believe there is a God, you don't think they have good reasons for doing so. And so you reject the claim. So an agnostic, if somebody says to me, do you believe in a God? Like there are lots of people I talk to and I'll say, do you believe in a God? Or do you believe that Jesus raised from the dead or something like that? And if they say I'm agnostic on that, they're not answering my question. They're answering a different question. They're answering the question, do you know that a God exists? Or do you know that Jesus raised from the dead? So to me, it's a way to avoid the question of belief. What do you actually believe? And you either believe that a God exists or you don't. That's it. Your degree of lack of belief is a different issue. but you're either inside the camp of believer or not. So if I say I know that if I believe there's no God, then I would be X. What does X equal? X equals, I was supposed to equal Gnostic here. So people who know there is a God are X, and those who don't know there is a God are not X. So there are lots of,
this is interesting to me.
there are lots of people, I think you would know, Janine, who I don't know if they would be comfortable saying that they know that God created the universe. They believe it. They think it's a belief
Yeah.
that they hold, but they wouldn't feel comfortable saying they know. So they could be agnostic theists.
Yeah.
And I would call myself maybe an agnostic atheist.
Yeah.
Right. And there are Christians who would say they know God exists, and they would be Gnostic theists.
You know what? Maybe this is super naive to say. It probably is, because I'm not very studied in this at all. But just sitting and listening to like the atheist breakdown and the agnostic breakdown, it just, I could be so missing the point. I don't know, but I kind of feel like there's this whole idea surrounding Christianity sometimes with certain groups, depending on what you've gone through in your church experience or your life experience, but that, you have either a trigger or you don't, for people being really black and white about things and people being really not black and white about things.
Right.
And I tend to be one of the people that gets triggered by people being hardcore black and white in any part of life for the most part.
Right.
So that's my own personal thing. And I don't know, and at this point don't care whether it's right or wrong. It's just something that I'm kind of trying to mull through, I guess. But I feel like the X being in the middle and everything, right, like belief or non-belief is outside and separate, and it only can be one way or the other. And it maybe doesn't make sense in the big scheme of things, but to me, I don't know at this point if I can be convinced that there isn't any gray and there isn't any wash that goes outside of that line, that kind of like that X, if it moves close to that line, if this is like even makes sense, can't paint itself outside of that line and still be kind of in or out at the same time.
Are you inviting the possibility of two circles that slightly overlap?
Yeah, I think I can't, like, in my head where I'm at right now, and whether, like, I don't need things to be one way hardcore, and what, even if science says right now that something is this way, I can't even, like masks are good to wear. They are good to wear. But am I going to be angry at that person because they don't wear it because it's the right thing to do? No, that's their choice. So I don't know if that's a good analogy either.
Yeah, no, it is. I actually feel the same impulse. So what I'm talking about here isn't saying that there aren't people who are in a gray area in their attachment. I'm talking philosophically. Those people in a gray area, if they're not convinced, it's sort of like this. Let's try this. Let's go to the next slide.
Sorry, I didn't mean to
no,
take
let's
over
try
that.
this next slide actually tries to address your question, because when I've talked about this before, Ruth, who we don't need to say any last names here, but just I talked with Ruth a little while ago, and same problem, same resistance, like didn't like the feeling of having to be one or the other. And I'm not making anybody be one or the other. I'm saying philosophically, you can't escape these categories, philosophically speaking. You can feel like you're somewhere in between. That's a different thing. But in fact, you can't be logically. That it doesn't mean I like it. So like if you take a look at this is the philosophical law that says you're one or the other in every case. So the law of excluded middle says for any proposition or any claim, think of claim, either that proposition is true or its negation is true. There's no other alternative. Something is either true or it's not true. It can't be in between. It's not possible. So if you look a little further down, I wrote, on any truth claim, X either exists or does not exist. There's no alternative. There's no middle ground. X is either blue or it's not blue. There's no middle ground blue. If it's middle ground blue, it's blue. Make sense?
Yep.
So it's either the thing that gets tricky is you want it to be the different, believing and not believing to be similar to hot and cold, because there's a middle ground with hot and cold. It's called warm.
There's warm. Yeah.
Right? But in that case, that's not what it's saying. It's saying only if we address the question of hot, everything is either hot or not hot. You're not saying everything is either warm or not warm. Everything is either cold or not cold. Do you see what I'm doing there?
Yep.
So yes, something could be warm, then it's in the category of not hot. Something could be cold, and it's also in the category of not hot. Only things that are hot get to be in the category of hot. So if you define hot as everything above 27 degrees, everything above 27 degrees is hot, and everything that's below is not, no matter what temperature it is.
Okay, but what if you define hot as anything above 20?
Then everything above 20 is in the category of hot, and everything below 20
okay.
is the category of not hot.
Okay.
So whatever your definition is determines the fate of where you land on that. That's why people like to start with definitions when they have a conversation. So if you take a circle, if X is a circle, it's either a circle or it's not a circle, right? Like it can't be a circle and not a circle at the same time. It's called the law of contradiction. X can't be X and not X at the same time. It has to be X or not X. So A is either hot or not hot. There's no third alternative. And it's the same with belief. You're either, you believe or you do not believe. It's a philosophical fact. It's not something that you can feel your way out of. I feel like I'm in between. If you're in between, you're not convinced. You're not a believer. You either believe or you don't, right? Everyone either believes X exists or they do not believe X exists. If you do not believe X exists, this does not mean you believe that X does not exist. Do you see the difference there?
Do you guys see the difference?
I'll show you, I can show you that in a diagram. I actually found a way to visualize that weird statement because it's
So
very
philosophically and relationally, that reality helped me join you on this journey in terms of emotional and mental discussion.
Is picturing it like this to some degree?
Oh, really? Like how, Dad?
Well, in the sense that I remember my first theology class, and we were talking about belief, and our professor said, we don't start by talking about belief, about God. We talk about what God is not, or any other philosophical thing. That one of the ways to access it is to start by what it is not, and then deconstruct from there, and then reconstruct. So for me, it wasn't that Chad was saying there is no God. He was saying, based on this principle, I can't believe that. But it's not an anti-God. I'm against that concept.
Right. Well, what I would
also farther outside the circle than I don't know.
Yeah. So for me,
okay.
you would need this for right now. This is only about belief. Everything in the context of belief, you either believe what it exists or you do not. If it's knowledge, then we're talking about a different everything.
Right.
Right. So it's really just, so for me, there was relief in finding this way of thinking because I didn't have to sit around and defend the idea that there is no God, which that seems like an irresponsible claim to make because then I'd have to defend it. Like, how am I going to defend? Like if I came to you and I said, listen, I believe there's there are monsters, 12 miles under the surface of Jupiter who are speaking to me telepathically at night. And you said, listen, I'm not sure I can accept that claim.
I can get behind that one.
Well, and what if I came to you and I said, well, prove me wrong?
No, I believe that. I'm going to start.
Prove me wrong. Well, does the fact that you can't prove me wrong mean that it's acceptable for me to believe that there are monsters 12 miles under the surface of Jupiter? No, the person shouldn't have to prove there aren't any monsters under the surface of Jupiter. They should be able to support the claim that there is. And I just reject it.
So the way I experienced this is that from my background, I had to defend my faith. But then watching your journey, I didn't feel like I had to defend my faith to you, or that you had to defend your lack of faith to me. There was something, not that transcended that.
I just had doubts.
It went from, we're talking here about belief.
Right.
And making faith a separate thing.
Yes. Yeah, faith, I don't see those two as similar.
Whereas for the people who are, I would say, at the core of the X, they don't separate belief and faith.
Yeah, sure.
For them, by and large, it is all the same.
Yeah.
There's no sense of, what I do.
Yeah, so for me, I mean, this is a separate topic. For me, I see faith not as a good thing, not as a positive, right? I see it as not as a virtue, but as a vice. And but that is a different question, right? The question, how to define faith and what it actually means, because everybody has a different definition of faith, and that's a much more treacherous conversation, in my opinion, than what is theism. What was that beep?
I don't know.
I just got a text, I guess.
Maybe you can turn off the volume on that. So anyways, let's go.
I'm just gonna shut my window. I think the ambulances and stuff need to stop coming by. 1 second.
Okay, let me go to the next one, Janine. I think you'll like this.
Okay.
This will help. So on this one, we're not saying the question of whether God does not exist is not on the table here. It's just God exists. There are two options, green or red. God exists is green, and I do not accept that God exists is red.
Oh, okay.
So, but what if we do this? Now the next one is God does not exist. If God does not exist is the claim, then everybody who believes that God does not exist is inside the circle, and anybody who does not believe it, right, who rejects the claim that God does not exist, is here. So this is where the believers would be. It depends on the question you're asking. So whatever question you're asking, there is an answer with two options, right? Where either you believe or you don't. You either believe that reincarnation is a real thing, or you do not. You're not convinced. It doesn't mean that you don't think maybe it's possible. I think there's no, it's not logically impossible for there to be unicorns. There's no logical reason why there couldn't be unicorns. There's just not a good reason to believe that there are unicorns. So I'd reject the claim that there are unicorns. I'm not convinced.
I have faith.
Right? So I don't have to defend the idea that there are no unicorns in the universe, because that would be exhausting. I'd need a spaceship that could travel faster than time, right? So, or than light. So, it's not a good thing to try to do. So it works with hot and cold. The claim is your coffee hot? And your coffee is either hot or it's not, right? That's it. Everything fits into this paradigm.
Yep.
In terms of truth, whether it exists or not, whether it's definitionally, something can't be hot and not hot at the same time. It's either hot or it's not hot. It can't logically be both. That's impossible. It's impossible for A to be A and B at the same time if B is a different thing, right? You can't make A and not A.
What if you have a hot woman and this guy thinks she's really hot and that guy says she's not?
Yeah, so then you individualize it for she's not absolute, there's no absolute there.
That's my deep
right?
thought.
But all of this is from a certain perspective.
Yeah.
Like, we pick boiling and freezing as 0 and 100. That's completely subjective. It has there's no, but as soon as we pick those things, as soon as we accept that those are good standards, then we can determine what numbers represent hot and what numbers don't.
So for the unicorn that lives in a volcano, coffee is cold.
Sure, that's right. Yes, absolutely. And the coffee is everything for the unicorn is either hot or it's cold or not. It's not cold because it could be warm, right? You can't say it's either hot or cold. It's the difference between saying everything is either true or false. That's not necessarily, we don't know, who knows? I think that's probably true. But what I'm saying is I reject the claim that it's true. I'm not saying it's false, and that's different. Everything is either true or not true. I'm not saying everything is either true or false. Everything is either false or not false, right? Everything is either warm or not warm.
Yep.
So when you look at the claim God exists, there are, let me see if I can draw here. No, let's do this one. So,
That's kind of fun.
So if this is the claim that's being made, whatever claim it is, there are two options. God exists or God does not exist. There's no other option. One of those is true. What can I accept adds a different element. What do I believe is a totally different question. So these are positive claims. These are claims. These are not claims. These are just people who reject those claims. They don't have anything to defend because they're not making a position. They're just rejecting a position, a claim. Do you see that? So somebody who is a believer, they would have to believe, if they go to this question, this is their only option. They can't believe both of these at the same time. That's not rational. They can't both believe that God exists and believe that God does not exist at the same time. It's not logically possible, right? But they can believe that God exists and reject the claim that God does not exist. Those are their only options. The person who says God does not exist only has one option on this question too, on the question of whether God exists. They reject the claim that God exists. This is what makes them an atheist. This is what makes them an anti-theist. Atheist. Every anti-theist is also an atheist. But not every atheist isn't necessarily an anti-theist. So if I...
That puts into words the distinction that emotionally and otherwise mentally helped me the most.
Oh,
right
really?
there. Yeah, so for me, I actually, there are gods, I think, that don't exist and that I would say don't exist. Like it's not logically possible, in my opinion, for there to be a God that's all-powerful, that's all beneficent, benevolent, and free will. To be those three things are not logically compatible, in my opinion. So any God that incorporates those three ideas, I would defend the case that God cannot exist. So in some cases, I would take this position. There are some gods that I think we have evidence sufficient to warrant a belief that they don't exist. But there are lots of different gods that I would never bother taking this position. I would just say, I can't accept that. I'm not convinced. I don't see good reason. I don't see enough evidence to warrant accepting this claim. So you either accept or you don't accept. You either accept this one or you don't accept this one. So if I reject this one, I have two options. I can accept that there is no God and be this person and reject that God exists, or I could be someone who rejects both. So this one is the only one where the arrow goes two directions. So this is where it's confusing. This is where the word agnostic came from. A person who is not convinced that there is a God and is not convinced that there is not a God either. That's why the word emerged originally. It just doesn't make sense to call yourself agnostic there. You're just saying on this question of whether God exists, I'm not convinced. This separate question on whether God does not exist, I don't accept that either. They're two separate questions. You either believe that God does not exist or you don't. You either believe that God exists or you don't. A or not A or not A. Two separate questions, just like hot and cold are separate questions. Everything is either hot or it's not hot. Everything is either cold or it's not cold, right? You can't be this. This is not allowed. This is not a relationship that's possible. Right? So I hope does that help a little bit?
Mhm.
Okay. Next, this might, mom's like, yeah, totally. I
Yeah.
love it.
Pass the, Mom,
Yeah.
like pass
So
the time.
how about this one, Mom? How about this one? If this one makes it easier because it's really like there's no threat in accepting that there are only two options. Whereas with all these other beliefs, it feels uncomfortable to not accept a gray zone or feel, right, is even and odd. We can say that everything, the number of stars in the universe, it's a fact that there's either an odd number or an even number at any given moment, right? That we can, or how about blades of grass in our yard? In somebody's backyard at any given moment, there's either an even number of blades of grass or an odd number. There can't be both. There has to be one of them,
Not like
right?
that's
So if you believe if somebody comes to you and says they believe
If you can count them all.
if you could count, yeah, I'm just saying hypothetically, like, so
But
if somebody comes,
But I mean,
if somebody comes, I think it's just like the question of God though, right? Like some people will say, nope, there's an even number. And there's an even number. I got evidence, right? I got good reasons to believe that there's an even number. So if you believe there's an even number and I reject that, does that mean I believe there's an odd number?
Yeah.
Nope, it doesn't. I don't have to believe there's an odd number to reject the claim that there's an even number.
right.
If somebody else comes to me and says there's an odd number, I'm like, how do you know that? I don't see any good evidence to believe that there's an odd number. So I reject that. So I get to be here because I'm sufficiently responsible intellectually to know better than to make claims I can't support and to commit to them,
Yep.
right? And to defend them. So it's true that there's either an even or an odd number. Now, all you have to do is fill in God or not God, or there is no God here. It's the same phenomena. I reject the claim that there is a God. This one, in many ways, doesn't even matter. It doesn't. The not God question doesn't actually matter in many ways, as far as evidence goes. You know, if you have a body and oh no, I won't go there. So that's that's going to go. So that's really all I've got is it's this idea that atheism is, and it's also a pretty useless term, right? It doesn't tell you much about the person at all. That was another big thing I wanted to make sure I got across to you guys, that it's.
Well, and you used the analogy with me once before about the grass in our lawn. And
The even odd thing? The even odd one?
The even odd thing. And
Oh,
that was
okay.
very helpful. So helpful that it comes to my mind every time I cut the lawn.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Every time you count your blades of grass, you're like, man,
Yeah.
I'm thinking about
It
Chad.
used to only take me 45 minutes. Now it's taking me 45 hours to cut the lawn.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, you're cutting one blade at a time. You got to count along the way. So to me, I don't know if that makes it less threatening. I think what people find is that when I say this, I do think people find it less threatening saying, I believe there is no God. I don't think they should. I don't think they're really understanding it, because what I'm saying is when you go to a court, how about this? This is another way to do this. You could say, oh, whoops. It's still doing my drawing. How do I make it stop? I don't want it to do this
Don't
anymore.
press draw. That's the way.
There we go.
Yeah.
So if I go right here and I go instead, what's a good one here? Instead of God exists, oh, I lost it.
Heaven. Something about heaven.
Yeah, I don't know where I was going with that. Yeah, I just wanted to emphasize that if I reject that claim. Oh, here, I got it. I remembered. So there's often in the, this is a pretty common in the atheist community online, a metaphor. When you go to court, you say that somebody is either guilty or innocent. And that's true. Somebody is either guilty or innocent. There's no alternative. They're either guilty of what they did or they didn't do it. And let me just erase this stuff. So if they're guilty or innocent, we always presume innocence. That doesn't mean we conclude innocence. It just means we start our starting place for inquiry. So we presume that they're innocent, and we start here, and they have, the burden then is for the prosecutor to support this claim right here, to support the claim that the person is guilty. If they don't have sufficient evidence, they get to be not guilty. If somebody comes to me and they say, I believe that God is guilty of existing. They believe that God exists. God is guilty of existing. All I'm doing is saying there's not enough evidence to warrant the claim of guilt. Not guilty. I'm not saying innocent. I'm just saying not guilty. We start with innocence just as a methodological starting place. And you do that with any inquiry. If you don't ever want to start a question with accepting it as true and then trying to disprove it, because you can't disprove unicorns. If you did that process, you'd have to believe hundreds and thousands of different things that aren't true until you could prove them false. That's why we don't start with guilty until proven innocent.
Okay.
If you think about, that's why we don't start with guilty until proven innocent, because there are lots of people who can't prove that they're innocent. They don't have an alibi, but they're not guilty. You start with them being innocent and then having to prove guilty. If we started with guilty until proven innocent, we would all end up in jail really fast and stay there because we couldn't prove that we didn't kill our neighbor's cat, right? Because we were at home alone, and how are we? We don't have an alibi. Somebody just went to the court and said, yeah, he did it. Well, you're guilty until you can prove you're innocent. That would suck. That would be a world that would suck. Intellectually, the same thing is true for atheists. They think that, well, no, the starting place is there is no God. They're not saying there is no God. They don't know that. That's just a methodological assumption. We start with false and only come to a conclusion of true once there's enough evidence to believe it's true. You don't believe it's false, you just presume it's false. It's not a claim you're making. I don't claim that there is no God. I don't have to. I presume it. It's a starting place. And once I find that there's evidence to warrant God being guilty of existing, I will be happy to believe it. I'm just not convinced. When I found this way of thinking, I cannot tell you how much of a relief it was for me. Like, it's hard for me to choke back tears right now. Like, it was such a relief to have a kind of Marie Kondo style of cleanliness in my mind, where this framing allows you to be honest about where you really are and to not be cloudy. And it frees you from having to know something to be convinced, or having your doubts not be part of the process of your convictions, right? It helps you frame it all a lot easier. So that's it. That's all I got.
That's all you got?
That's all I got. Yeah.
I'm going to need some wine.
Well, it takes
to let that sink in. So, like,
it softens and turns down the volume on the necessity of defensiveness.
Yeah, well, I mean, at least this way, if we have conversations, if my friends want to talk to me about this, who are believers, they can at least know, oh, well, the conversation, if there wanted to be persuasive, would have to be around evidence or reasons, and that's a fair expectation, I think, I would love to be persuaded that there's a God. If there is one, I do want to know. I'm not afraid of that idea.
So when you did the guilty, not guilty thing?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm probably, yeah. Anyways, I'll just say it. So guilty or innocent, sorry.
Yeah.
If the thing is so even in law, there's lots and lots of gray. So it's probably more procedural than anything, but if you think of it, so a girl say for conversation goes in and she's on trial for murder, and she has been brutally assaulted. She's gone through captivity, but she's murdered her captor. I'm going dark.
Yeah, no, I love it. No,
but
it's good. It's a good
but
example.
that happens, and so she's on trial because by the law she's still murdered someone, right?
Right.
But where do we sit with that? Like if you're like, yes, she's guilty. Yeah, she's guilty of murdering. So yeah, I guess there's the innocent and the guilty part. But the part in the middle is the part where I get intrigued with. It's
Yeah, I
not
think
this and this.
that's
Like
yeah.
it's
So
this part. It's the
so
story. It's the yeah, I guess I don't live in the I totally know what you mean. Like it takes me a bit to get there for sure. And it's good when you're repeating it cuz then or in different ways because I totally can then see different, like it compiles onto each other and then I kind of can like get it. Um and I'm not finding it hard to find out that one's essentially seen as right and one's essentially seen as wrong in some ways or opposite of each other. But it's the part that in between that I find hard to, I guess, put that whole part into this one section and this whole part over here for it to be right or wrong. I don't know.
well, so to me, what you're talking about is that is the fact that we're ignorant of so much that we're not in a position to know one way or the other.
Yeah, and I think that I get like I fully have been there and I get why it's like I get the whole thing of leaving faith or questioning faith and getting completely like absolutely hyperventilating because you feel like you're leaving something that has been who you are.
Yeah.
Um, but I guess I'm so not afraid to go into those other spots that I feel like I find it still really hard to go this way or this way. And even to see it on a picture, even if I innately know logically that's supposed to be this way and this is supposed to be this way, I still find it hard to not say that they're all connected. And I don't know if that makes sense, but it's
Oh
like
yeah, totally.
maybe
I
it's
feel it too.
universalist. I don't know what that means really.
Well, so
um,
I think what the people don't like is their philosophy suggests that you can't escape these two options, and
right,
people don't want to be pigeonholed into having to be one or the other. So that's why the word agnosticism was created to begin with, was to say, well, I'm a third alternative. I'm not this anti. I'm not walking around going there is no God. I'm not convinced there is one. So like I'm not. So
right,
there's an attempt to create a third alternative. There are sort of three alternatives, right? There's those who believe one or the other, and those who don't, and those who don't believe the other on the other side, right? So there are
right,
three options in a way, but that doesn't mean that in every single question that you ask, you necessarily by you just necessarily are one or the other, whether you like it or not. You don't have to like.
right,
If you're not convinced, you're an atheist. You don't have to accept that. A lot of people do that, where they come and they go, well, I prefer to. There's a guy who's come out and he says he calls himself no, I'm a creativist or something like this. So come up with a term where no, I don't want to be called an atheist. But do you believe in a God? Well, no. Okay. Like, okay, you're a creativist then. Fine. Whatever you
that
call it.
has more probably to do with just him wanting to be unique,
Yeah, I think so. But I also think they
different.
don't
There's
want this.
also people who call themselves atheists who believe, which I find very ironic. How
Huh.
much does philosophical, logical positivism and then our experience interferes with that and begs us to look for this, what Janine is calling gray area?
Yeah, I
Because,
don't think I think that's actually there's a bit of a none of this suggests that there isn't a gray area.
yes,
What this suggests is
Okay,
that the gray area is the place in which we don't understand things.
yes,
totally.
That's it. It
yes,
doesn't. So You know, are there
Oh, that's
people
all
on
I'm saying.
are there people on a spectrum of belief? Yes, absolutely. But it is wherever you decide is the commitment point of what is a person who believes. Everybody is either inside of it or outside of it. It doesn't mean that there aren't people who are here and here who might define that differently. But what it does mean is that um, those people who are in the blurry zone, who are uncomfortable with calling themselves one or the other, are not being logical. They're not being reasonable, in my opinion, right? It's not my opinion. I can demonstrate it. Logically, it doesn't make any sense to say that you're not one or the other. It doesn't make me feel better because I don't feel like I should have to be pigeonholed like that. But there's also a comfort in it. It's two things. Like you said, it's not one thing. It's always complicated. In your example, I found what's fascinating there is that it is a fact, one way or the other, that she's guilty or innocent, right? So that none of that logic disappears. The gray area you're talking about is whether we should punish her for that or not,
Right.
whether she deserves to be punished for killing her fucking perpetrator, right?
And
So
that's where I'm wondering, what is that begs that question of us? Is it experience and its dissonance with, let me see if I can think of a concrete example. Okay, so we have some friends that are very much in the center of that X.
sure.
Okay, in the center of that X circle. They have a daughter who would define herself as atheist and also lesbian. So they live inside of that belief circle, and in their belief circle, lesbianism is wrong.
Sure.
And so she is judged. But relationally, they get to know her. And when you watch them operate, they love this girl and they love her partner.
Right.
And yet they have this belief system. And all of a sudden they're in that place where, okay, I believe, but I don't believe anymore
Right.
on that particular issue.
Yeah,
And
that's a painful place to be.
that's what I'm getting at. That's a painful place. How to trust that place. Like I was brought up, with sort of no one preached this directly, but the attitude was God doesn't like artists because they ask too many questions. All right. Now it's more like, no, bring it on.
Yeah.
And I want to live those questions, even though philosophically.
Yeah, like, I mean, I think what's hard about what I'm saying is it feels like I'm telling people you either believe or you don't, right?
Yeah.
And like you need to accept what I'm saying. That's not what I'm doing though. I'm describing what I see as facts. It's
and
not.
You're not trying to make it.
Well, no. What I'm saying is that the philosophical logic is really helpful if you want to really talk about the truth. If you want to talk about what is true, you can't do it outside of a context in which A could be A and not A at the same time. You can't make that claim and be in a reasonable conversation. That doesn't mean that life is clean like that, or that any conversation is
Or
clean.
that there aren't paradoxes, or
so like this lesbian atheist example. Okay, so I'm glad that they're really nice to her and like her and are kind and whatever. They've picked certain verses in their book that are the good ones. That doesn't mean the book is good. It does mean they are good in my mind because they picked better verses than the other ones that don't say that they should do that. And that's great. But maybe it doesn't shift their belief. And that wouldn't be a good reason in my mind to stop believing in God, is because their daughter or somebody was an atheist or was a lesbian that they loved. That wouldn't be a good reason to stop believing in God. But it is a reason people often do start doubting.
yes,
Right? They start to go, well, I've been told X all my life, and I see somebody who I love saying they can't be otherwise, and I've been told they could choose to be other than what they are. my whole life, and now I can't reconcile that. Somebody's wrong. And that's where X and not X are so helpful, and why we don't want them to be, because we prefer to hover around and not commit on certain things. And it's some cases that's dangerous. In many cases, it's just better for us to be in a state of doubt and not be so certain. Certainty is, to me, is a big threat to all of us. That's why people are willing to fly planes into buildings, is because they feel certain. They wouldn't do it if they didn't feel certain. So I'm grateful for doubt. And if I were to evangelize anything, it is that doubt is a universal healer.
Well, and one of the ways in which it's the universal healer.
Yeah.
It puts us in a position
I've
of
heard it expressed in
humility.
in a for lack of a better term, contemplative.
What did you say, Chad? It puts
Oh,
you
sorry.
in humility?
Yeah, to me, like one of the things that I feel like you do well, Janine, is you're like, I'm not comfortable. I'm taking on your voice. I'm not comfortable accepting X or Y until I can accept it. And there's a humility to that. It's being intellectually responsible. So to me, it's being ethically responsible as well, because is it ethically responsible to commit to something that you aren't actually super convinced of? So to me, embracing your doubts is something that rescues us from the threat of commitments that we don't have the grounds to act on, or to vote for X.
It's a little bit hard when you're like, the only part that I find, I think, hard about that part of maybe my thinking lately is that you're deemed by one camp or the other camp as being wishy-washy for it, or you can be, or being non-committal, or being non-this and that. And you kind of want to tell people off.
Yeah.
Like, you kind of want to just be like, we're all trying to figure things out, and some of us actually aren't. And if you don't want to figure things out, or you're doing it quietly because you're an introvert, or you're just not that kind of person that wants to talk about it, good for you. You do what you do. I'm not saying, I have no right to say that anything's the right way or the wrong way. So I don't know. I think I've come out of that parts of Christianity where it's like, you have to be almost like for lack of a better connection, like a Stepford wife of Christianity, to have the matching shirt and to have the matching car and to be able to fit into that mold kind of thing. And to me, that's the X. Like, that's,
Oh, I see.
like when I see an X in the middle of a box, I see you're this way or you're not this way. And I'm not either of those. So where do you fit then? Are you a circle in the middle, or do you have a line into each? Are you allowed to?
But what you're talking about there are about 40 different X's and not X's.
Yeah.
So that's why it's disorienting. I'm talking about, if you just took one thing, are you the person that wears those shirts?
Yeah.
You're either X or you're not X, and you're not X.
And I totally get that. I'm not fighting against that. I just think there's just room for a lot of, like, and you're not saying there isn't. It's not against anything. Right. It's just more like, I like the conversation, I guess. Like, selfishly, I like the conversation of the rest of it more than I like the,
philosophical discussion.
Yeah, like, I'm not saying it. I like that discussion, and because I don't go there I don't go there. I don't have those conversations with people. So it's super cool to see that kind of broken down on paper, and to like see that those analogies and how they connect, and the cross and I just think it's cool because it has a parameter for me, and like, I don't know, it's just a cool way to actually visually, because I'm so visual, to see it. And so go ahead.
I was just going to say that what it does for me, just so you know, is it isn't that I bring in that model and make everybody talk about it like that. That would be weird. I wouldn't have any friends. Right? Like, nobody wants to talk like this all the time. That would be exhausting. I don't want to talk like this all the time. but I do think that whenever I have a conversation, it's like if somebody I've maybe mentioned this before, like if you put two people next to each other and one has an abacus and one has a calculator, who do you trust to give you the answers most quickly, most likely, and most consistently? The person with the calculator is going to, so behind the scenes, if questions come up, this is like a system where I can frame things. Like any question that people come to me, I can go, well, where do I reside on this?
So is this a methodology by which you sift the evidence?
Sift anything.
Yes.
So if somebody comes to me and says, there's that global warming isn't real, it's not a human-made thing. I know where I position myself within that context, and I know why I'm not in this position. I think there is sufficient evidence, and I think I could find it, and I think I could show why these scientists are coming up with data that isn't stilted to promote some ideological fantasy. So for me, it's not about that I bring up that I know where I am in the conversation. It's that behind the scenes in my brain, right here, I can navigate really smoothly in a conversation in a way I couldn't before. So one thing I'm talking about is the method by which I'm thinking. The other one is what does it really mean to be an atheist? And those are two different things. Those are slightly different things. I happen to fit the way that I think about my atheism into this model, but I could fit how hot coffee is into that model too. I could fit anything into, like even with your friends, if your friends come to you and they say, I think X should divorce somebody, right? You can begin to frame those. What's that?
Nothing. I just agree with you.
Yeah, that person should.
Yeah.
Yeah.
O is a loser. If we're talking
Right.
X and O's.
Yeah. Yeah. O needs to be sent to a different home. Sleeping on the couch tonight. So I hope you get what I'm saying there. I think everybody is using this logic in conversations without knowing it. Like you can't say that A is A and not A and be trustworthy as a person.
The current president of the United States accepted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Sorry, I didn't want to go there.
Yeah.
Yeah, you did.
I think you're right. Anyways, thanks you guys. I don't know if there's any other stuff you wanted to bring up. Janine, your question about the kind of gray stuff, I hope we can come back to it because I still think there's lots of stuff to understand there. Like I think it's very fair.
Well, I remember you saying once, I'm not sure if I'll get it right, but you said something about like moral, like that's a totally different topic, but moral issues. Like morality and what that all involves and like innocent, guilty,
Right.
like that kind of stuff. Yeah, I find that super interesting because I guess it's easily talked about because there's lots of gray in it and I like the gray.
Oh, I see. So it's so me too. I do like that. And morality is a different issue than say truth. Like truth,
Right.
This kind of model makes a lot more sense there. But if you're talking about truth in the context of morality, this model would be fine.
Yeah.
But in morality and ethics, definitionally, whatever you determine is good, then right, definitionally, everything that fits into that definition is good and everything else is not.
Right.
There was an author at Trinity Western who wrote a book on Can You Be Good Without God?
Right. Yeah, that would be a fun
or the mystical,
that
would be a good
I'm not sure, Teresa of Avila, maybe, I'm not sure, who said, we know that we cannot know.
Yeah, well, I like that too, but I do think that there's like for me, there's an easy answer to the can you be good without God? Well,
yes.
Thousands of our ancestors did it before anybody had an idea there was a God, and they didn't survive. They couldn't survive without people being good to each other. They would have died. This whole idea that compassion evolved in magically and is it's all self-interest.
Yeah.
How could we have survived if we didn't love each other? What if, how would a child survive if the parent didn't feel an irrational commitment to being willing to die for this little thing, right? Like
Right.
we couldn't have made it if
There
our
was a
ancestors.
saber-toothed tiger chasing it.
Right. That's a different issue, but yes.
You have
Yeah.
to kill that guy.
Yeah.
Guy's gotta
So to
die.
me, the selfish genes and the unselfish genes and all of those things came together. They're a mixed bag, and
Yeah.
that's why we're confused all the time about what's good and what's bad. Yeah, for sure.
Is there anything you want to ask us, like point blank kind of thing? Because that's kind of fun.
Anything
Yeah.
to ask us?
Well, how would you, maybe this, you don't have to answer this, but if you want to, you can. So I could tell that you guys wanted to know. I put the X in dead center just because it's systemically, it just looks, it's symmetrical.
It's
right?
balanced.
But you could have put the X right near the right side edge of the circle.
I would have been more comfortable with that. I'm not gonna lie.
Right. That's what I'm guessing. That's where I'm going.
And it's all about me and where the X goes.
So if the X all of a sudden, as it goes over to the other side and becomes X still, but it's like not XX.
Yeah.
Like where do you, I mean, this is a public forum, so say whatever seems best to you. Where would you place yourself? How do you position yourself in that spectrum of where would you say, what do you feel like at the moment? Even, or maybe it's different every day. Your commitment to the idea of a God is, or religion in general, maybe, or whatever question in that arena. The supernatural.
Yeah. For me, if I draw that picture, then what I find myself wanting to do is buy into that dark circle, but I want to have a bunch of other circles inside of it that are made with dotted lines.
Yeah.
So it
that's
isn't so
not
much
a problem,
the X,
actually, right?
the X it isn't so much where the X is placed, but where do I place myself process-wise in terms of those circles that are drawn with dotted lines. And that for me is mitigated both individually, which frankly, if I'm honest, is not stable in the sense of got it.
Yeah.
But also within a community. And the best way I can describe what I mean is there's a fascinating scholar preacher in the US named Barbara Brown Taylor, who's probably close to my age now. She's a professor at Current, but she's been a clergy person in the Episcopal Church, which is the equivalent of the Anglican Church in Canada. She's 19, going to Harvard Divinity School. She's been a lifelong Anglican. She walks into church Sunday morning. They recite the Apostles' Creed, and she hears the line, which has just been rote for her all her life, now as a budding academic, and I believe in the virgin birth. And she bursts out laughing.
Yeah. Right.
And says,
been there.
Yeah, can't go there. So where does she now travel within the line of the circle or the X in her mind?
Right, sure.
She's been brought up within a framework where that was a key faith item, and if you didn't believe that, the whole stack of cards fell.
Right.
But she said, then experientially, I looked across the aisle of my church, and there was my friend Mary, an elderly woman. And she said, I know for Mary that belief in the virgin birth is absolutely crucial. So she made the decision that, okay, for the time being, I'm going to let Mary believe in that for me, because I just can't believe that.
Right.
And then she thought, oh, but I've had another discussion with Mary. And Mary believes that all of those street people should just go out and get a job. That poverty is created by laziness.
Right.
And she said, my understanding and my work on it is that no, poverty creates laziness, not laziness creates poverty. And I know Mary disagrees with that. Those people should just go out and find a job. But I realize That doesn't work for them. And so I'm going to believe that for Mary right now. And what that does for me, at least within the model at present, and it may change, is allows me to move closer to the edges, but then on certain things, I find myself tempted to move right outside of the circle.
Yeah, I know.
I want to honestly sit there and hold that belief, not belief, in that area of I want to make room for doubt in both.
Yeah, right.
Inside and outside. Maybe that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, that's a nice way to put it. You want to feel free to doubt, but not just jump ship
Yeah.
on the
And
value of
that's what I
something.
appreciate about your journey, Janine's journey, Mom's journey, and sometimes my own. But anyways.
Yeah,
What about
that's
you,
nice.
Mom?
What about you, Mom?
Well, I don't know. I don't relate a lot to the exes.
That's okay.
I have to have a lot of that really explained to me if I really feel I need to.
I think you'll be fine without it.
Yeah. I think you've got your own thing going on. You've got cakes. I
Yeah.
like cakes in the middle. Why don't we put a cake in the middle of the circle? You
Well,
bake a lot of
and
cakes.
relationships.
Yeah.
I just think, Mom, what we're talking about, though, is sort of where you feel like you are in terms of belief in some of these things that have been so important to our family history and have been such a big deal to all of us. I mean, these are beliefs that are part of our lives deeply, right? I mean, it's whether we believe in them or not. It's not the point.
I just feel very freed up for not having to believe everything. Like
I'm not making a battle.
I just don't. I just feel freed up to live my life and enjoy what I have and what I think and not feel. I just don't feel that heaviness that I've felt in the past. I feel really freed up that if I don't believe the Old Testament or that kind of stuff.
You're not a fan of
I don't
slavery,
like
maybe.
I don't like it.
Yeah.
Weird, Mom.
And there's so many things that have been part of my life that were so important, what I believed and how I thought, that I don't, and the fears I had of dying, of death, of all those things that I feel freed up from. So to me, that's my life. And
That's your coming out party.
yeah, I just don't, the only thing is that when I don't feel I believe something, it's not that easy for me to just to say I don't believe it. I don't know. I like questioning things. I like thinking about things and talking about them, and
Are you trying to say
I want to be okay with not having perfect answers to everything. I don't know. I don't know how to explain that.
I wonder if part of what we all might find not super appealing about the kind of X not X thing and like that is that it does remind us all of some of the stuff in our history we've wanted to leave behind.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Definitely,
and so it does
definitely a trigger for me for sure.
Right. So it feels similar, so similar to that is it just the same shit over again?
That's what I think that's what I always am like, there's people who believe this, there's people who believe this, like atheist Christians, yeah, and Jewish people, whatever, different religions, and you you get out of one and you go to another, or you go to nothing or whatever, but you're all, there's a certain sense of like a lot of people trying to kind of, whether you're a Christian or you're an atheist, I find if you're really, really involved in the process of figuring it out, like you are, Chad, and like you like going into all different areas. And I like going into different areas, but I'm not as studied as you, and I'm definitely not as, I don't have the conversations that you do with as many people, I would say. Mine would probably be more internal. But I think that to a certain degree, we're all trying to feel like we're okay with where we're at, right? Whether you say, I don't care what people think, that's kind of bullshit. Like I call bullshit. You'll care one day, you'll not care the next. You know, like it's all relative to who you're sitting with and what you've gone through that day or how you feel. But I think that we all are really trying to figure out at the end of the day, maybe not, but I feel like it, that people are okay with where we're at.
For me, that's the, sorry, go ahead, Janine.
And I just think, like, where does our hunger come from? Is our hunger for figuring this out because it's for us or for where our brains are at, or what? Or are we trying to figure it out because we still are seeking the approval of people to say that it's okay? And I think that it's okay, right? Like I think
you want it to feel safe to just not have to be pigeonholed by anybody.
Yeah, and I think I find that that's the biggest form of grace, like in my life right now, is when I see people, not just for me or for, like, I don't require it really anymore. I don't feel like very often, but I feel like when you see people extending that to people who don't think the same, whether it's within Christianity itself, whether it's within other thought processes, it doesn't have to be about religion, but when people politically even have room to, like, I wholeheartedly have a belief in when I'm watching that political scene from afar, and you have your belief system of what you've seen and heard and what you've researched. And most people that lean in my direction when I've had conversations, they would never, it gets them furious to think that a person they would know and love and think are great think the opposite of them.
Yeah.
And they're like, how can an educated person think opposite of this belief? Because it's just ridiculous. And it's kind of similar to religion, any thought, any kind of, I guess, is atheist, I don't know, being an atheist isn't a religion. It's a thought, is it? It's a thought process.
No, I mean, there's no religion.
Right? It's a
I mean,
belief.
people will say, Christians say that it's some kind of religion, but atheism is just one thing you don't believe.
Right. So, like, I just think there's...
Yeah, they'll say, tell me the God you don't believe in. Tell me about
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I just think that there's just so much more room for conversation. I had a huge conversation, like, whether this is about religion or not, I'm totally taking it to the political realm.
No, that's fine.
I had a huge conversation with someone who blew my mind because I could not believe that this person, I literally couldn't, I still can't believe how different we think, and how I would never have thought that, because when we talk and we joke and we basic life stuff, we're so on the same page. And
that's right. That's that 80% thing that I was saying, right? There's a lot of this, but then there's...
But that 20% is
a big deal.
Make it everything. Yeah.
A huge difference. Where I had someone, while I was talking to this person on the phone, I had someone who, I was on speakerphone, and I had someone in the background, like, freaking out about it. And I was not I was surprised, but I was intrigued. I literally was intrigued. There was no part of me that was like, well, how can this be? I have to get him to see my side. And I love that about people. And I'm not saying it's like I'm always like that. I can't always pull that off. There's no way. But I try really hard. And in this case, I was like super proud of myself, I guess, for being able to, and I shouldn't have to be proud of myself. It should be how I am in my mind. But I just found it like a cool conversation because I let it be. I wanted to hear what this person thought. And I was shocked by it, but I was also like, huh, there's probably room for me to understand some of this stuff. You know, like there's
I
probably a
agree.
reason
Yeah.
because I respect this person and they're really, really solidly studied on everything they talk about. I'm like, huh, there must be something to this that I don't know. Right.
Yeah.
So I think,
And usually there is, right? I mean,
yeah,
even in, even where you think somebody's wacky on Y or Z, it doesn't mean that they're not on X and that there isn't something worth.
well, and the cool part was that if you're really like interested, if you go in hard with someone and you're like, no, like, but what about this and da 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 da, you're not going to have a conversation. Whereas if like the fact that I was like, that sounds crazy to me, like, what are you talking about?
Right.
And I totally like almost made it lighter only because I literally just said what came into my head. Those are the kind of things that I think I wish we could all do with each other a little bit more.
That's what this,
Like I think
and that's what this channel, this is
yeah,
what Craig and I want with this channel. The goal is, it's called the cult of conversation.
right,
It's the idea that if you're someone who's tolerant of a very aggressive conversation, we want those, we're comfortable with those. If you're somebody that wants to have a conversation where you get to have a different kind of experience, where you get to pursue somebody's idea and see whether it's makes any sense, like you
right,
did, and be curious. I'm curious, right? Like I don't mind any of either option.
right,
But I want to be in a place where we get to have those conversations. Why? Because the world's toast without it. And I do think, like for me, just so you know, on these belief questions, they create intensity, and maybe sometimes it's unnecessary. Most of the time it isn't. Most of my social life has nothing to do with this. But I do think it matters where we land on many of these questions. And I do think it affects the world greatly when more of us believe X than Y, or X and not X. In many cases, and not in every case, but many of these beliefs, to me, who wins that argument, it matters, right?
right,
Not in all things. Like which side gets to be on center stage, it changes the world when
right.
one wins over the other. So to me, it really is important what we believe, but it
The
doesn't
thing,
matter compared to whether we're having a conversation or not.
the thing that matters to me too, though, is that if, or I think is the like the ideal kind of a leadership role is someone who, yeah, it matters who ends up on that stage because it matters more not which way they lean necessarily, like right or left, but if they are open and available to talk to either side, like legitimately,
That's right. Yeah. So
right?
that's what matters to me.
So
Yeah.
like a person being hardcore black and white on this and that is not necessarily the best person to have in leadership on a
Right.
big scale.
Unless, of course, they are willing to have, if that's just a style issue, I don't actually mind that. If there is a fundamentalist Christian, for example, who
Yeah,
is like, dude, you're going to hell and this is why,
sorry, it's
and
not
you're going to
funny.
burn for eternity, why would I not want to have that conversation if they're open to it?
That's what I mean. Like,
Right. So if they're
yeah,
open to it and they want to fight on the grounds of truth, I'm game. If they don't, if they want to talk about curiosity and they want to understand each other, I'm game. Let's just have the freaking
I
conversation.
know, I know,
Nobody's doing it, right? And it really
right,
bugs me. It
yeah,
really bugs me that we're not pushing harder into the conversation itself, whatever it is,
right.
because I think that's where the threat resides. The
Well,
only
that's
tool we
why things,
have is conversations. I
well,
mean, what
that's
else?
why
You
things,
want to find a way to be faithful to that premise.
Yeah,
In the
I
sense
want to.
of, you both know my friend Jim, so he sent me a story today that for me is a story that models that faithfulness. How are we time-wise for you, Chad?
I'm game. Don't worry.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And it's a true story. Apparently, the CNN reporter was in Israel, and she heard about this man in his 80s who has gone to the Wailing Wall to pray for 60 years every day. And that intrigued her.
That's grandpa.
So she goes to visit this man and interviews him at the wall, and she watches him and his earnestness and his seriousness. She waits until he's finished, and then she interviews him, and she asks him, you know, what do you pray about? Well, I pray about peace between the Jews and the Muslims and the rest of the world. I pray for our children in all countries, that they will grow into responsible citizens. I pray for our world. I pray for the people that are poor. He goes on this huge long list of all the things that he prays, literally for an hour or two every day. And what's that like for you, she says. How does it feel? And his exact words are, it feels like I'm praying to a fucking wall.
Interesting.
Look around you.
That's what she said.
That faithfulness of staying true to what his sort of inner reality is. And so I think underneath all of us is a longing to be faithful, I'm not talking faithful as a religious term, as a true to something. And so I want to affirm your dialogue and what your blog is about in terms of extending that conversation.
It's kind of like stripping fear away from stuff. I think the majority of people, yeah, there's pride, there's ego all involved and all of that stuff with not wanting to be willing to discuss things and see it another person's way or take in little pieces at least.
Yeah.
Right.
But I think a ton of it just has to do with fear underneath it all. I don't know.
I agree. I think it does. It does for me. And I do think that being open to trying to find ways to relieve ourselves from that. How do you earn your way out of fear unless you have the conversation? Like
think of what's happening all over the world right now based on the conversations that, I mean, it happens in every country. It's just because the States is so close to us that it's always talked about, and it's so on TV all the time. But like what's now happening, like it's horrible, all the stuff that is happening. But look at all the conversations that are happening because the rug has been lifted by an absolute, sorry, in my opinion,
just
maniac.
say it. Yeah, don't worry about it.
And he's lifted the rug and gone, you can come out now. Go to it. Let's shake this shit up.
Yeah.
And like release the hounds, and they go forth and destroy so much. But in the end, what's coming out of it is like there's some serious healing coming out of it. There's some serious massive pain. I think that overrides everything first. But there's some like intense stuff that's always been there, that everyone's been afraid to talk about. And now it's like cancel culture, and that's a different thing. But now it's like they're afraid to say too much, too little, like, because you're going to get canceled. So it's like it's a weird balance, and it's a hard one. But
can I add to that? The one thing I think that is difficult about that whole scene to me is that this has happened. This kind of outpouring of sort of repressed racism, repressed feelings of insecurity about your identity disappearing from the face of the earth, right? And or whatever it is that's going on, or a loss of values or traditional values, and all of these anxieties. If we're honest, we should be responsible enough to say we can understand why people might not want to lose these things that made them feel good in the past. Whether they're right or not is a different question.
Yeah,
but,
I want to keep going to Starbucks.
Right. But they want to. But to me, what is difficult is this is happening at a time in history where we no longer feel like we should have to persuade everybody to think differently, where we feel instead like you just express that they're idiots. So you express that I'm a good person, you're not, and you're an idiot, and clearly, and not be persuasive. So to me, it isn't that like I want you to come on here and tell me why something isn't making sense to you, or why
it's
you
name
need to,
calling. It's like you're
It's an
at
inequality.
the playground and you're
But
kicking dirt in each other's face.
but I hear people say all the time, I'm not coming here to change your mind. I'm like,
Yeah.
well, then what value do you have to anybody other than yourself? You're just telling us I am X. Congratulations, you're useless.
Yeah. You should be a
What you
cake in the
believe makes
center like
sense.
Lynn wanted. Then
What?
you're useful.
Yeah,
You're
well,
the cake and
so
not the
so
X.
you had talked earlier, just so you know, you had talked, this whole cake thing is, I'm
It's blowing
super
your mind.
hungry.
I
I'm
know.
super
I
hungry right
know.
now.
Yeah,
There-
we do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're when you were talking before about why is it that like, so for me, before it was all personal, why I was struggling with all this stuff, it was always seeking just for me. But I, you know, this is where I've worked out a lot of stuff in life. So where would I be best at trying to have an impact that I think is meaningful? To me, this is one of the arenas where I want to have these kinds of conversations.
Well,
about fairness.
especially because I would assume that when you're doing something like this, the people that are watching it for a reason
Yeah, and
because
I'm
they've
not knocking on
chosen to,
doors.
right?
I'm not knocking on doors, and it's an invitation.
Yeah, like
So
so it feels it's a really cool way for you to do that without feeling like you're like kind of tiptoeing into the conversation or wanting it,
yeah, right.
but you
I
don't
don't
want to
have to like,
you don't
you
want to
know,
like bring it all the time to the people. So you're like,
well, I don't have to
can we go now?
I don't
Are
have
we
to
allowed?
victimize my friends and my family
Yeah,
with curiosities that they're not
yeah.
interested in pursuing at every
Once again,
moment.
the saber-toothed tiger could be coming,
Yeah.
so you need to run for the cave
Yeah,
sometimes.
so to me, it was a personal intellectual, you know, journey of, but now it's more, I think it's an ethical feeling now. It's not just personal. Now it's like, well, I don't want to go to the grave without trying really hard to do something as thoughtful as I know how to do. Whatever it is that I do, I want to be thoughtful about it. And I remember when a lot of these early conversations happened, they were with mom. Mom and I talked through tons of this stuff years ago. And she was on the phone with me talking about X, Y, or Z for
I feel like
an
I'm
hour.
having flashbacks of my childhood.
And right, we had, yeah. So
Yeah, good
so
night,
why,
whatever.
and what I remember feeling was that, like Mom said earlier, we want the freedom to be able to think clearly. So I don't want to be afraid anymore. I don't want to get to 80 years old and have not feel free, comfortable putting whatever it is I think on the table for anybody to look at without fear.
And
I don't
seriously,
want. That's what I want.
anyone who is in their 40s and is going through, or 30s and is going through the whole freak out of kind of coming up to 40 and that whole change of life, like 40 40s are good for this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Like they should not be afraid of it. It is, you just got to go deep, get it over with.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah. Go
really
through it.
crash hard, because it's better if you go like all the way almost,
Yeah, well,
because
I
you
want
come
a
out of,
world that's, I want a world that's more, I want to live in a world that's more open. If my daughters want to believe in the tooth fairy,
right.
I want to live in a world where they get to do that without somebody telling them they
Yeah.
can't, or they're not free to. So I will defend everybody's right who believes in things that I think are nutty or not reasonable or
Yeah.
don't have good evidence. No offense. Oh. But I will defend anybody's right to believe what they want to believe above everything else. I just want
Right.
to have within that context a marketplace in which we get to have a conversation, because I think it does make the world different when we believe X over Y or Z instead of A, right? And I
What
think that means,
say,
go ahead, Mom.
what what if someone like Debbie here, and Jim and Bev want to listen to some of your things like this?
Oh, like this conversation, they could just subscribe to our channel on YouTube, and
It's
they
easy,
would get
yeah.
Okay,
something would go to their YouTube channel, and they could go on our site and see every video. We're
We
doing one
should
tomorrow.
definitely talk about them more then.
now can they
Yeah. Well, I don't want to market them too much, right? I mean, I
but
want.
they've asked, at least each one has asked at least 2 or 3 times.
I think they would love to hear this woman who
Yeah.
told us her story about her deconversion. That was really wonderful. She's going to
I
interview.
watched it.
She's going to interview me tomorrow on
Amazing.
mine.
It
Oh,
was
cool,
just
Chad.
the neatest thing.
I
loved
know
it.
she's lovely, isn't she? She's just amazing.
Yeah, she's just so real.
A very
Oh.
courageous person, Janine. I think you'd love
She's gonna
her.
interview you tomorrow.
Yeah.
She's interviewing
That's
me
what he
tomorrow.
said.
We're doing another conversation, but what she felt like was, hey, it's not fair. You got to interrogate me, but you went through something too. So now it's my turn.
Oh,
Right.
cool. When?
And so she asked if she could kind of participate in a dialogue with us going that direction. And Craig wanted it too. He's kind of asked me to do this dialogue. I didn't plan on doing it with you guys, but I'm sure glad I did. I mean, this is really way more fun than what I had planned to do myself. To me, this is a great, I'm really grateful that you guys would do this and participate in this way. And I do think it's a model for like, why can't everybody talk about this stuff? I don't know why we aren't trying hard everywhere.
Isn't it weird? Like, well, at least it is for me.
It's uncomfortable, I think, but.
Well, you know what? It's weird though, because I think I would have probably felt that way to a certain year of my life. And like, there's no part of me that feels any bit weird about it now.
Right.
Like, I could talk to anyone about it.
Me too. Yeah.
And I don't know when that changed or why, but I just don't have any of that left.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Like, it's
I'd be
great.
curious. We'll have to talk about that sometime, Janine.
And I think it's important to note that when we're together as a family, this is what our family gatherings are always like.
Right.
We're never silly or just have fun. Or
No.
They're always like this.
Well, we did.
Yeah.
I think we're going to have some friends who are going to listen to this one and be only a little bit disappointed that Mom wasn't a bigger part of the conversation. But
Why?
well, because
they want to hear from
everybody knows you're thinking pretty hard and that you work on this stuff a lot harder than many people in the world. So at some point maybe we'll have to have you on here and interrogate you at some point.
Yeah, leave me and Garrett out of it.
Yeah.
Well, no, I want you guys there too, but
no, I just mean seriously.
Yeah,
like,
I know.
Lynn.
Yeah, I know.
We'll be in a separate room on our own Zoom from her.
Okay.
She's like a hot unicorn.
So hey, just let me close the door on this then. On the stuff that we talked about. Again, this is the Cult of Conversation. If you have made it through this whole video, we're grateful that you've spent the time with us. And if you want to subscribe, that would be great. You can keep in touch with us on the Cult of Conversation YouTube channel. Going forward, do you guys feel at least a little bit like some of what I did for you here helped me more sense of where I'm at than you did before we had the conversation?
Yes, it's all gift.
I think
a lot of this stuff you kind of knew, right, Janine?
Pardon?
Did a lot of the stuff you kind of we've kind of.
I think I kind of get it. Like, I don't think I've ever had a problem getting you and like getting why you would feel the way you were or how you got there and what made that happen, your story, the reasons. Right. There's like no part of me that doesn't get that. It's just, I think the parts that I've struggled with, to be honest, and this isn't trying to open up a whole new conversation, I think the part that I struggle with, and I'm still struggling it within myself too, so it's not a you and me thing per se.
Right.
But it's with anyone who, the part that's harder for me, I don't know why, is the soul issue.
You're right.
So I have a big
that I reject the idea that a soul exists.
Yeah, I think that is the one. It's not like it makes me go like I'm right, you're wrong.
No, I get it.
There's something about it that breaks my heart.
Yeah, I remember talking about this. So maybe that would be, I would love it. Would you ever want to have like a public conversation on that and like explore it?
Oh, totally.
Maybe you could include somebody else who is in line with like Erin or somebody.
Yeah, she would have totally, like Erin and I think a lot alike, but she would have a totally different way of wording it and describing it. It would be much less feelings based.
Well, I mean, part of what I think is interesting to me, what makes me curious, is how emotional this stuff is. Not just for you, but for me as well. It's pretty it carries a lot of weight, right? And why is that?
I know. I don't know.
you know,
And I
so
think that's the whole reason I brought it up is because I wonder what that is.
well,
Like, why does,
let's look into that. Let's do like a real short little conversation, short,
yeah, sure.
whatever length.
Like 45 minutes.
Yeah, 45 minutes.
That's super short.
And we'll have this conversation another time. Would you want to do it? So maybe we
Yeah,
can
for
have you
sure.
back. That would
Yeah.
be awesome.
Yeah,
All right.
that sounds like
Okay.
a neat
Would you,
idea.
Mom and
What,
Dad,
Mom?
that would be a fun one, wouldn't it? Would you guys like to hear Janine and I talk
Yeah.
about that?
Yes,
Yeah.
I think
We'll-
that would be
We'll
awesome.
be the flies on the wall.
Okay. Awesome.
Yep.
Awesome. Okay. Love you guys. Thank you so much
Okay, love
for
you.
participating on this with me.
Thanks for
Bye.
All right. Bye.
bye.
Say hi to Shauna and
I sure will.
Yeah.
Say hi to everybody.
Yeah.
Okay, see ya.
Bye.